अष्टप्रायेष्व भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोकैर् भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। हरे कृष्णा। एष वै भगवान् साक्षात् आद्यो नारायण पुमान् मोहयान् मायया लोकं गूढश्चरति विष्णुनिषु। हरे कृष्णा।
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Sashwin. So translation of Canto 1, Chapter 9, verse 18. This Sri Krishna is no other than the inconceivable original personality of Godhead. He is the first Narayana, the supreme enjoyer, but he is moving amongst the descendants of King Vrishni, just like one of us, and he is bewildering us with his self-created energy. Purport. The Vedic system of acquiring knowledge is the deductive process. The Vedic knowledge is received perfectly by disciplic succession from authorities. Such knowledge is never dogmatic, as ill-conceived by less intelligent persons. The mother is the authority to verify the identity of the father. She is the authority for such confidential knowledge. Therefore, authority is not dogmatic. In the Bhagavad Gita, this truth is confirmed in the second verse of the 4th chapter, and the perfect system of learning is to receive it from authority. The very same system is accepted universally as truth, but only the false arguer speaks against it. For example, modern spacecraft fly in the sky, and when scientists say that they travel to the other side of the moon, men believe these stories blindly because they have accepted the modern scientists as authorities. The authorities speak, and the people in general believe them. But in the case of Vedic truths, they have been taught not to believe. Even if they accept them, they give a different interpretation. Each and every man wants a direct perception of Vedic knowledge, but foolishly they deny it. This means that the misguided man can believe one authority, the scientist, but will reject the authority of the Vedas. The result is that people have degenerated. Here is an authority speaking about Sri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead and the first Narayan. Even such an impersonalist as Acharya Shankara has said in the beginning of his commentation on the Bhagavad Gita that Narayan, the personality of Godhead, is beyond the material creation. The universe is one of the material creations, but Narayan is transcendental to such material paraphernalia. Bhishma Dev is one of the 12 Mahajans who knows the principles of transcendental knowledge. His confirmation of Lord Shri Krishna as being the original personality of Godhead is also corroborated by the impersonalist Shankara. All other acharyas have also confirmed this statement, and thus there is no chance of not accepting Lord Krishna as the original personality of Godhead. Bhishma Dev says that he is the first Narayan. This is also confirmed by Brahmaji in the Bhagavatam 10.14.14. Krishna is the first Narayan. In the spiritual world of Vaikuntha, there are unlimited numbers of Narayans, who are all the same personality of Godhead and are considered to be the plenary expansions of the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. The first form of the Lord, Sri Krishna, first expands himself as the form of Baldev, and Baldev expands in so many other forms, such as Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, Vasudev, Narayan, Purusha, Rama, and Nrsimha. All these expansions are one and the same Vishnu Tattva, and Sri Krishna is the original source of all the plenary expansions. He is therefore the direct personality of Godhead. He is the creator of the material world, and he is the predominating deity, known as Narayana, in all the Vaikuntha planets. Therefore, his movements amongst human beings are another sort of bewilderment. The Lord therefore says in the Bhagavad Gita that foolish persons consider him to be one of the human beings without knowing the intricacies of his movements. The bewilderment regarding Sri Krishna is due to the action of his twofold internal and external energies upon the third one, called marginal energy. The living entities are expansions of his marginal energy, and thus they are sometimes bewildered by the internal energy and sometimes by the external energy. By internal energetic bewilderment, Sri Krishna expands himself into unlimited numbers of Narayanas and exchanges or accepts transcendental loving service from the living entities in the transcendental world. And by his external energetic expansions, he incarnates himself in the material world amongst the men, animals, or demigods to re-establish his forgotten relation with the living entities in different species of life. Great authorities like Bhishma, however, escape his bewilderment by the mercy of the Lord. That's the translation and purport. Thank you for the opportunity to come back and speak. It's been such a long time since I've actually given class at Eldoret. Yeah, it's nice to be back and churn the nectar from the Bhagavatam. So before we get into the verse, I think it'll be nice to just do a bit of a recap of chapter 9 in terms of what's happened so far, right? So we start off the chapter with Maharaj Yudhishthira on the scenes, and he's lamenting, he's afraid of the slaughterfest that happened at the Battle of Kurukshetra, and in some way he holds himself responsible for it. So to try and get some clarity of thought, to try and get some ease, to try and calm his mind down, he goes to Kurukshetra, right? So before in the previous chapter, we know that Krishna tried to appease him, but that didn't work. So now Krishna sent Yudhishthira Maharaj to Bhishma Dev itself. So Bhishma Dev, the other Pandavas, Krishna, and great personalities, right? Like Vyasadev, Narada Muni, Parshuram himself as well. They all come to the battlefield of Kurukshetra where Bhishma Dev is lying on a bed of arrows. And what did they do? Did they just go and lament? No, they actually see Bhishma Dev in this situation, but recognizing that this is still our grandfather, this is still the great Bhishma Dev, the personality. Pandavas and Krishna offer their respects. They bow down to him. And Bhishma Dev in turn, despite being in that precarious position, he's offering his respects, his obeisances, mentally at the very least, to all the personalities that have come, right? All these great personalities. That's an interesting point right there, where Bhishma Dev, lying on a bed of arrows, right? His physical situation stops him from physically honoring and paying respect to all these great Vaishnavas. But mentally, despite his actual position physically, he's mentally still acknowledging and paying their respect. And he's even inviting them. He's even calling out to them with great love and affection. And then in verse 10 particularly, when Bhishma Dev is addressing Krishna, he says, since Bhishma Dev knew of his glories, he worshipped him duly. So then we go on and we see that the Pandavas are overwhelmed, right, at seeing Bhishma Dev in this position, right? This is Bhishma Dev, the grandfather who looked after them as children, who raised them as a child, you know, with so much love, care, and affection. He helped them grow into the warriors that they are. And seeing this, Bhishma Dev immediately starts to try and cut out all of this sort of lamentation that they've got about the situation. He starts to glorify and praise the Pandavas for the achievements that they have today, as well as the achievements that they've had from all the tribulations that they've been through previously. Why? Because they were protected by Brahmanas, God, and religion. Because they were protected by all these things, they were able to achieve what they had achieved. Even Queen Kunti, right? She went through so many sorrowful moments, right? She went through so much suffering, being a widow, then mothering 5 kids, you know, two of whom weren't her actual, in her lineage per se. Then all the dangerous positions that her sons were put through by the Kauravas. They went through so much, not just the Queen of Kunti, but also the Pandavas. They all went through so much. But Bhishma Dev is appreciating and praising and glorifying their achievements for having stuck through it, all because they were protected by Brahmanas, God, and religion. And then he goes on to explain about the concept of time that we hear from the Bhagavad Gita, right? Kal, where Bhishma Dev kind of elaborates on the point that it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how skilled you are. It doesn't matter what birth you have, right? these Pandavas, we know that they were the sons of demigods, right? Indra, Vayu, Yamraj, the Ashwini Kumaras, all great demigods. But it doesn't matter at the end of the day, because ultimately time is what reigns supreme. Nothing of this world can change the waves of time, right? And that's what Bhishma Dev was trying to explain. And then in the verse just before today's, we see that Bhishma Dev actually attributes everything that the Pandavas went through, right? All the experiences, whether the good, the bad, the suffering, the tribulations, to the ultimate victory in the battlefield, right? He attributes it all to be part of the Lord's plan, and that they should accept it like that, right? They should accept that's what the Lord's plan is and continue on with the position that they've now acquired, the administrative heads of all the citizens. So then we come to today's verse, where Bhishma Dev is starting to call out Krishna as that Supreme Lord, right? That Supreme Lord by whose plan everything that has happened has happened. So just repeat the translation of the verse today. This Sri Krishna is no other than the inconceivable original personality of Godhead. He is the first Narayana, the supreme enjoyer, but he is moving amongst the descendants of King Rishni, just like one of us, and he is bewildering us with his self-created energy. Now, this is a very interesting verse, right? It's such an amazing verse. It has so many packed points, right? Talking about Krishna being the supreme personality of Godhead, talking about him being the original Narayana, the supreme enjoyer, how he came to this earth to perform human-like pastimes. And then it's even talking about the self-created energy and how it bewilders us, right? How the energies of the Lord bewilder us as jivas. But yet, when we look at the purport, we see that Srila Prabhupada doesn't start talking about this verse. He doesn't start going into any of these points. He starts the purport by talking about what? By talking about how to acquire knowledge, the process by which we can acquire knowledge. Now that's interesting. Why is Prabhupada on such a packed verse telling us or trying to explain to us that there's a process by which we should acquire knowledge? And then he lays that process out for us. When we read the verse in context, which is why when we read or when we're studying the Bhagavatam, any of the scriptures, it's important to always keep the context, always keep the conversation, the dialogue in mind. We can understand that actually what's about to happen is that Bhishma Dev, up until this point, has explained the principles of God without explaining who God is, right? The principle of God as the time factor, or God in terms of helping the Pandavas attain this victory. But he's not explained or mentioned directly that Krishna is that supreme God. Who I was talking about until now is Krishna itself. But this verse and the next 4 or 5 verses, actually, Bhishma Dev starts to really establish Krishna's position as the Supreme Lord. And not just establishing him as the Supreme Lord, but actually paying and offering his appreciation for that Supreme Lord to come at the time of Bhishma Dev's own passing. Now, for some of us who are on the call, we might be familiar with the Mahabharata, the character of Bhishma Dev, but maybe not in so much depth. But what we would probably know and understand is Bhishma Dev was fighting against the Pandavas, right? So a question that might come to mind is, well, why should we believe Bhishma Dev, right? Okay, he was this great warrior. He fought the Pandavas. He was unbeatable. He was unconquerable. But then Krishna and Arjuna cheated him, and that's why he's now on a bed of arrows. Why should we believe his words, right? Especially by the fact that he was fighting against God, and now he's calling Krishna God. That doesn't make sense. And it's for that exact reason, along with helping us as devotees understand that the knowledge that we're acquiring doesn't come from just our own endeavors. It comes from a process. We should be looking to acquire knowledge through a process. It's for that reason that Prabhupada actually explains this process. So the origins of this explanation actually comes from the Upanishad's introduction as well, where Prabhupada is actually describing 3 types of evidences, and then also the idea of 2 types of knowledge, right? So just read the quote from the introduction around the 3 evidences. There are 3 kinds of evidence: pratyaksha, anuman, and shabda. Pratyaksha means direct evidence. Direct evidence is not very good because our senses are not perfect. We are seeing the sun daily and it appears to us just like a small disk, but is actually far, far larger than many planets. Of what value is this seeing? Therefore, we have to read books, then we can understand about the sun. So direct experience is not perfect. So if we think about direct evidence here, just with the analogy that Prabhupada's given, when right now it'll be nighttime, but you could look at the moon right now, right? Right now, if the moon is out, then you'll see, okay, with our direct senses, with our eye vision, we see, oh, the moon is a white ball in the sky, not in a ball, a white circle in the sky. It's bright. And that's what our senses tell us. But we know that the moon is not just a circle, it's actually a planet. We know that it's a globe. So our direct senses, right, the evidence that we've acquired from just seeing the moon or seeing the sun is not very reliable, right? It's not perfect. Then we can move on to the second type of evidence, which is anuman. Prabhupada says, then there is anuman, inductive knowledge. It may be like this, hypotheses. For instance, Darwin's theory says it may be like this, it may be like that, but that is not science. That is a suggestion, and it is also not perfect. So we can see this inductive knowledge, or this anuman, as a way where we're trying to infer higher principles or higher knowledge by using limited and lower experiences and knowledge, right? Another example that comes to mind, very classic one, is Newton. Newton's law of gravity. Sitting under a tree, an apple falls. Okay, he sees that the apple has fallen, and so he's hypothesizing, okay, there must be something that this land, this earth, there must be something for it to attract the apple, for the apple to come down and not up. He didn't have any form of evidence for his theory, for his induction, but he just saw an experience and he tried to relate it to a thought process, a thought experiment. But then Prabhupada, in the next sentence of the Upanishad introduction, says, but if you receive the knowledge from the authoritative sources, that is perfect. So many times we see, just in the scientific or the research world, that there's this theory that comes up, there's that theory, and now, okay, no, the research was wrong, we missed this point, that point. And now new studies suggest X, Y, Z. All these things, because we're missing a lot of context, we're missing many factors, makes all these processes imperfect, right? Whether that's from direct evidence or from theory crafting, from the inductive knowledge. But if we take knowledge from the authoritative sources, from those sources which provide the perfection of knowledge in that field, then we're guaranteed that it will be correct at all times. So there's 2 types or 2 systems of knowledge, right? One is the inductive, which is the progressive, right? Looking at the examples, looking at the experiments, trying to find the higher principles. And then there's deductive knowledge, which is accepting the higher principles from an authority and using that to navigate through the world. Now, if we look at our own lives, if we look at the world around us, we actually see that, yes, there is a lot of pratyaksha, there's a lot of direct evidence that's being acquired. There's a lot of anuman as well, philosophers, theoretical scientists, you know. But there's also actually a lot of shabda that goes on in the world around us, right? We actually take knowledge from authority a lot in this world. For example, imagine when you were a child, right? Or such one, right? He goes to school. What does he learn in school? Does he think, okay, does A come before B? Does B come before C? Or does he just accept what the school teacher teaches? If the teacher says the alphabet goes A, B, C, and the student says, no teacher, I think it's A, D, C, then what's going to happen? The teacher's going to correct the student and say, no, the alphabet goes A, B, C, and the student will accept it. They won't go and experiment, or they won't go and create a theory crafted thought process around the alphabet or any of these things we learn in school. They'll hear the teacher, they'll see what the teacher's saying, what they're writing, and accept that as being the truth. Another example that we can think of is family, and Prabhupada actually gives this in the purport that we just read, right? If a child wants to know who his father is, a child can go to his mother and ask the mother, who's my father? Right? And if the mother points at a man, the child will accept it. There's DNA tests, there's all these things that we have nowadays that can help validate these things. But actually, why do we endeavor on the validation in the first place if we go down that route? It's because somebody who we consider an authority, be it our mother, grandparents, or whoever, has told us that this man is your father. Or if we go into the workplace, say we've started a new job, the boss or the seniors in the team, they might tell us, okay, this is how we do this task, these are the policies of the company. We don't question them. We don't go and try and find evidence for, okay, how did this job process come into place? Okay, who actually created the policy and all these things? We don't go into that. We just accept that, okay, these are my authorities at work. They're telling me this is how to do the job. This is how I function in the company, and I accept it. And in the same way, when it comes to scientific truth, when we actually reflect on how we use science, how much faith or trust we have in science and the scientists that give us that science, without actually going down the route of experimentation or research ourselves, we understand that we actually rely on the scientists knowing what they're doing, knowing how they're going to do it, and understanding and interpreting what they've got out of the research or the experimentation that they've done correctly. Whenever we talk about science, that, oh, you know, oftentimes we'll come across people on the streets, especially whilst we're preaching or book distribution, that, oh, I don't believe in God, I believe in science, right? Prove that God exists, right? We have so many proofs for science, right? But the question is, well, have you seen these proofs that the scientists come out with? When you look at the next news article that says, new research suggests X, Y, Z, have you actually participated in that research yourself? Or are you just trusting that the article, the publishers of the article, the scientists, the researchers involved in the article have actually given and presented the truth, have actually given and presented the foundational understanding that is required for those experiments? Do we trust that they've gone through that process? If we do, then we can accept what they're saying is correct. Then we accept that they're authority. But the reality is, when we look at science, right? Or actually, let's take a step back. When we look at authority, what should an authority be? An authority should be somebody or something that we can believe, we can put our trust and faith in. That what they're saying, what they're giving to us is perfect and complete, for at the very least, the context or the content that we're going to them for. So when we're going to a physicist, we're trusting that they know what they're doing in that field of work. When we go to a maths teacher or a biology teacher, we know and trust that they know perfectly what we need to learn. If we ask them a question and they say, I think this, I think that, we try to do this, we try to do that, then it's difficult to trust them. But yet we all place trust and faith in science so much. And yet every 5 to 10 years, our textbooks keep changing. I know Kritika Mataji is a doctor by profession. She has to learn so much despite being so advanced. I don't know Kritika Mataji's official title, but no doubt she's been practicing for many, many years, 20, 30 years plus. And yet she's probably still learning about new things that come up in the field of science, in the field of medicine. She's still probably studying and trying to understand why what used to work before no longer applies now, and why some other medicine needs to be provided, why some other treatment is better. The reason is that the authority of science that we put so much faith in, it's not that they're bad or necessarily bad or misleading intentionally. They're imperfect, right? They're trying to provide knowledge of a greater realm than what they have available to them today. And that's why new theories come and the old theories get rejected. When we have new advancements come, then old ways of science, old ways of working get abandoned, or they get classified as inferior or backwards, right? But when we look at Vedic truth, right, then we can realize and understand that this is the highest source of authority and knowledge. So when we're placing our faith in science and scientists, which is changing every 5 to 10 years, why not instead shift that faith, that trust, that authority from the scientists to the Vedic principles, to the Vedic literatures, to the Vedic authorities, which hasn't changed in thousands of years and will never change in the future? Why can we say that for sure? Because we can understand from the Bhagavad Gita, right, that the Vedas, the Vedic knowledge actually comes from God and is non-different from God, right? The goal of the Vedas, in fact, is God himself, right? In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vedescha sarve ahmeva vedyo vedanta krit veda vedeva chaham. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. Indeed, I'm the compiler of the Vedanta, and I'm the knower of the Vedas. So the Vedic literature that we place our faith in is because it comes from Krishna. It is Krishna. And the goal of the Vedas is Krishna. But to understand the highest source of knowledge, right, we have to understand who we can go to acquire this knowledge, right? Who is the authority that we can speak to or approach? And again, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that this is through disciplic succession that we receive it, right? Evam parampara praptam. We should receive this highest knowledge from a disciplic succession. What is a disciplic succession? It's where someone is taking the perfect knowledge from the perfect source and then passing it down to the next generation, to their disciples, perfectly, without alterating it, without changing it, without manipulating it. And then their disciple repeats the same process. They take that perfect knowledge and pass it down perfectly also. And then in that way, a parampara, a disciplic succession, is created. And at this point, we can really appreciate, right, and consider ourselves fortunate that we've all come here on this Zoom call, because we're a part of ISKCON, we're a part of Srila Prabhupada's movement, we're part of the shelter and the guidance that Srila Prabhupada has given, because that's exactly what Srila Prabhupada did. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the introduction pages, we can find, Prabhupada's laid it out for us, the parampara system directly from Krishna all the way to Prabhupada. So we can see that we're nicely placed under the shelter of a bona fide authority. right? Somebody who's actually taking the knowledge and passing it down perfectly. And then it comes to Bhishma Dev. Why is Bhishma Dev being cited as an authority? It's described as a Mahajan, and in fact, in the Bhagavatam, it's described that there are 12 Mahajans, of which Bhishma Dev is one. But what is a Mahajan, right? Prabhupada explains the term in many different ways, right? He calls a Mahajan authority, authorized by God, knowers of Krishna, followers of the Parampara. And one that I particularly like, one translation or one explanation of the term that Prabhupada uses is one who is rich in devotional service. Now, Bhishma Dev is one of these, right? Bhishma Dev is an authority. He's one who is rich in devotional service. And that is why we take Bhishma Dev as authority when we read these verses. That is why, despite Bhishma Dev fighting against Krishna, we take him as authority. And we can understand from the explanation of the Acharyas that actually Bhishma Dev was fighting against the Lord for the pleasure of the Lord itself. So when we read these verses or when we attend these classes for the next few days, especially on this topic of Krishna being established as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we can take it in the light and we can always meditate and remember on the fact that Bhishma Dev that is speaking, that is lying on these bed of arrows, it's not that we're listening to him in the Bhagavatam or that he's speaking in the Bhagavatam because he's a great personality or he is a warrior or just an associate of Krishna. No. We're reading and listening to him. He's speaking. Yudhishthira Maharaj has come to him because he is a great authority, right? He is a Mahajan. Now, another interesting fact that we can kind of notice when we analyze or look at different scriptures or even material books, right? Research papers and so on, that one great sign of a great piece of literature that is bona fide is that they're quoting different sources of authority or references, right? In the case of, for example, research work, they're always giving quotes or source references, right? At the end, or, you'd have like little numbers on the articles to explain, okay, this section of my research came from this book or this experiment and so on. And as devotees, we cite the statements of great acharyas, right? Whenever we're giving class or whenever we're talking Krishna Katha, oftentimes we talk about, okay, Prabhupada gave this in this lecture, or in Prabhupada's purport, he mentioned this, or we'll go to other acharyas, and Prabhupada does the same, right? Even in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjun is explaining to when Arjun's establishing Krishna as God again, he's not just saying, oh, I'm saying this because you're my friend. No, he goes and recites the fact that so many great personalities also are saying the same. From Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verses 12 to 13. You're the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You're the eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn, the greatest. And then the important part. All the great sages, such as Narada, Ashita Devala, Vyasa, confirm this truth about you, and now you yourself are declaring it to me. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, a conversation just between Arjun and Krishna, Arjun establishes Krishna's statement by citing the explanation, the knowledge from the authorities like Narada Muni. And we'll see how Bhishma Dev does this tomorrow, right? In tomorrow's verse, we'll see how Bhishma Dev is also citing authority himself. But actually, in today's verse, we see Prabhupada does the exact same thing. He recites two specific authorities for us. First is Adi Shankaracharya, and the second is Brahma. I think for a couple of minutes, I'll speak about them, and then I'll shift focus to one of the other points in the translation, actually. So who is Adi Shankaracharya, right? In the purport, Srila Prabhupada's referencing Adi Shankaracharya specifically for a commentary he makes in the Bhagavad Gita. which is Narayana Para Avyakta, explaining that Narayan is not of this material world, basically to establish Krishna's supremacy. Now, who is Adi Shankaracharya? Adi Shankaracharya, as some of us probably know, is, well, one part is that he is the incarnation of Shiva. But the other fact is that he established a very Mayavedic philosophy, right? An Advaita philosophy, which is teaching which presents the absolute as formless. So not a personal God. Now that's interesting. Why is Prabhupada citing him as an authority? Well, the fact is that when we trace the history, when we understand, like I won't get into it, but when we go through the history, then we understand that actually Adi Shankaracharya was sent by Lord Narayan, by Krishna himself, to help the world progress in its surrender and understanding of Vedic philosophy. So at the time that Adi Shankaracharya was present, the fact that he was establishing a formless form of the absolute was perfect in itself. That was the next progressive step that people needed to make at the time. But when we look at the works of Adi Shankaracharya, then we see that he's actually a sort of hidden Vaishnava, right? Where he's spreading this monism philosophy, right? Philosophy of oneness, of, a formless form of God. But many of his commentaries actually glorify Krishna as the supreme, right? He's accepting Lord Vishnu or Lord Shiva or Lord Krishna as being the only one who's praiseworthy as being called the supreme being, right? And this is across all the Vedic literature that he's commenting like this, that all the Vedic literature saying the same thing. And in fact, I share this because my name's present, but my name, Bhaja Govindam, right? It comes from a poem that Adi Shankaracharya wrote. Bhaja Govindam means worship Govinda. So Srila Prabhupada here is citing Adi Shankaracharya as an authority, despite the external presentation of his philosophy being Mayavedi. His internal mood, his actual commentary, his actual principles were that of a covered Vaishnava. And then the second authority that Prabhupada cites, Brahma, specifically for Bhagavad Gita 10.14.14, where Brahma is saying, Narayano Nagam Nara. Lord Narayan is your expansion, right? So this is Brahma speaking to Krishna just after the Brahma Mohan Leela, right? Where he's just stole the calves, the cows, the cowherd boys, and Krishna's just confused Brahma by manifesting so many different forms of himself, just to show Brahma that, look, you might have stolen all of these cows and cowherd boys, but actually they're all just an expansion of me. And then he's also, sorry, just before this Leela, this is where this happened, and Brahma sees that, oh, Krishna's God. When I'm worshipping Krishna, I'm making everything so perfect. So many thousands of multi-million pound or multi-million gold coins worth of paraphernalia goes into my worship. And here's Krishna who's just stealing a little morsel of food from a cowherd boy's mouth, right? So because of that, because of being bewildered by that, Brahma goes and performs the Vimohan Leela pastime where he steals the cowherd boys, etc. And then Krishna is just showcased that he is the supreme. And so this verse, this 10:14:14, comes off the back of that, where Brahma's realized his mistake. So when Brahma's realized that mistake, then he's glorifying Krishna. And in that glorification, he is calling Krishna the original Narayan, right? Where Lord Narayan is his expansion. So this is the importance of authority for us as Vaishnavas. Authority for us isn't just, oh yes, we've got a disciplic succession, we've got these acharyas, we've got all these Vaishnavas that we kind of look up to. Looking up to them is one part, but the other part is also taking their instructions, taking their statements and understanding them to help establish ourselves as devotees. Now, then later on in the purport, Prabhupada goes on to explain about the expansions of the Lord. Just for time purposes, I won't go into too much detail. But there are actually two sets of expansions, right? So Krishna expands into Baldev and a few other other expansions, and then Baldev expands into other expansions. And from those expansions, we actually get the material creation being come into existence, like the 3 different types of Vishnu and so on. So yeah, it's a very technical part of the Bhagavatam, or part of our philosophy as well. So yeah, I'll kind of move past that for now, just to kind of come to, just because it's the last day of Kartik, I think it's only fair we talk a bit about Damodar Leela and how is Damodar Leela relevant to what Bhishma Dev is saying. So if I go back to the translation, the last part of the translation is that, but he is moving amongst the descendants of King Vrishni just like one of us, and he is bewildering us with his self-created energy. In the last part of the purport, Prabhupada talks about how, just trying to find it. So he incarnates himself in the material world among the men, animals, or demigods to re-establish his forgotten relation with the living entities in different species of life. Great authorities like Bhishma, however, escape his bewilderment by the mercy of the Lord. So Bhishma Dev, who in the purport Prabhupada explains, escapes the bewilderment of the Lord. And then we have Damodar Leela, where Krishna, to one of his pure devotees, Yashodamai, is fully engaging her in bewilderment about tying Krishna. So just for Karthik purposes, I'll talk a bit about the pastime and then explain why it's relevant to this purport. So Damodar Leela, backstory, Krishna is very hungry. And so he goes to his mother, and he's, as a child, he's drinking the breast milk of Mother Yashoda. And at that time, there's milk that is on the pot that Yashoda must put for Krishna's pleasure, but the milk starts boiling. And in order to save that milk, Yashoda goes and puts Krishna down, even though Krishna's not satisfied yet. He's still hungry. Yashoda goes to attend to the milk. And Krishna, he becomes very angry, he becomes very annoyed at Yashoda's act. I'm here to drink your milk, and you've just put me down for some other activity? That's not right. And in that act, he starts getting annoyed. And what does a child do when they're not annoyed? They start throwing tantrums, right? As adults, I sometimes do that still too, but yeah. What's Krishna's tantrum in this case? He breaks pots, he goes and steals butter. He goes and takes butter and feeds it to the monkeys. And as Krishna is doing that, as Krishna is going from one place to another, just trying to find ways to satisfy his anger, to try and find ways to become a nuisance for Yashoda. Yashoda comes out and he sees, oh, Krishna's not here. Krishna's gone, but the pot's broken. And there's butter everywhere. Did Krishna do that? And just then she sees small butter footprints, taking her from one room to another. And she's thinking, okay, yes, let me find Krishna. And when she gets to Krishna, what is Krishna doing? He's feeding butter to monkeys while sitting on top of a grinding mortar. And then there's a chase scene that happens, forget all the car chase scenes that you see in movies, forget all the robbers and cops chase scenes. This is the ultimate chase scene, right? A son, which is the personality of Godhead, and his mother. So Yashoda's chasing Krishna, trying to stop him, trying to catch him, trying to punish him for stealing the butter with a stick in her hand. But Krishna is uncatchable. But just for Yashoda's pleasure, he gets caught. And once being caught, Yashoda thinks, okay, it will be good to punish him as well as protect him by binding him, by actually tying him to a grinding mortar itself. And as we know, because during the month of Kartik, I'm sure we've all heard of the pastime of the 2 fingers too short. As Yashoda is trying to bind Krishna, the rope is always 2 fingers too short. She goes, okay, let me bind once, too short. Okay, let me try and get some more rope. Ties the 2 ropes together. Tries again, still too short. 3rd time, 4th time, 5th time. Ask the neighbors, you bring your rope. Ask the neighboring villages, come, help me. Tie the rope. None of it works. Here's Yashoda fully sweating, and there's Krishna just standing by the grinding mortar and just enjoying, just taking the pleasure of the, in quotes, suffering that Yashoda was going through to try and bind Krishna. And eventually Krishna decides, you know what? Yashoda has endeavored so much. Yashoda has put in her heart, her soul. She's put in the efforts of all the Vrajavasis, of all the neighboring villages. I think it's time for me to reciprocate with that loving attempt. I think it's time that I get bound by Yashoda's love. And in that way, Krishna gets bound. Now, the learning there is that Yashoda put so much effort, put the effort of so many other devotees in to bind Krishna. She could have given up after a few ropes and be like, how is this happening? Like, what's happening? How is the rope not tying? Okay, Krishna is this big, right? He's a small child, so he's this big. His waist is about, maybe 1 meter in circumference or whatever it is. And yet I'm getting ropes which are 5 meters, 10 meters, 100 meters, and he's not, and it's too small for him. Such bewilderment of a pure devotee. And then we reflect of the bewilderment that we go through in our lives. Is it as nectarian? When we're looking at our finance report, when we're looking at the situation of COVID, so much bewilderment is there, right? How can a small virus, how can whatever the original source is, whether it's bats in China or meat in China or whatever it is, how can such a small thing cause such a drastic effect and shut the whole world down? We look at these bewilderments and become so anxious. We become so nervous. Many become scared. So here's the bewilderment of a pure devotee, for example, Yashoda, who is bewildered yet blissful, fully endeavoring to tie Krishna. And then there's our bewilderment, looking at the state of our life and questioning what is going on, why is it happening? I don't want this to happen. So Prabhupada's saying that Bhishmadev escapes the bewilderment by the mercy of the Lord. What we're talking about here is escaping the bewilderment of the external energy of the Lord, right? That energy of the Lord that actually takes us away from relishing Krishna's association. So when Prabhupada is telling us that we too can become, free, or as he's implying in this verse itself, that we too can become free by just following the footsteps of Bhishmadev, right? By associating with Krishna's Devim Prakriti, right? The divine or the spiritual nature, by associating with the internal potency. We can become free from the bewilderment of this world and enter the nectarian bewilderment that Krishna gives us in things like the Damodar Leela, Govardhan Leela, and so many different pastimes that take place. So how can we overcome that bewilderment of the material nature, right? As I mentioned, it's by taking the association of Krishna's Devim Prakriti, right? His spiritual energy. We actually go to Krishna and we take shelter of him, right? when we realize, as Bhishma Dev does, that Krishna is Sarva Karana Karanam, right? Krishna is the cause of all causes, and we take shelter of his divine energy. We engage fully in devotional service, or as the means of liberation in this world, in this yuga, in this Kali Yuga, is called, when we actually engage in the process of chanting Krishna's names, then we can become bewilderment free, right? And enter into the pastimes of Lord Krishna. So, as we do, right, when we think about chanting the Lord's name, then the first thing that should come up is the Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And if we're always associating with the holy name of the Lord, then in that way we can always associate with the Lord, and we can become bewilderment free like Bhishma did. So end there. Thank you. If there's any questions, comments, I'm not sure if Kritika Mataji is still there. Oh, Aravind Prabhu is there.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you, Dandavat Pranam. Now, Kritika Mataji, apparently she's in the temple and she's a bit occupied. So she asked me to host this program. Although I was a bit late, sorry for that, Prabhu. So thank you for the wonderful session. Nice to know your name and in relation to Bhaja Govindam song, which was there in today's verse as well, which is a nice coincidence. Thank you, Prabhu. And wonderful name. Congratulations on your initiation. Are there any questions or comments, Hare Krishna? Yeah. When we are talking about like bewilderment, three types of bewilderment, like of course, Bhishma Dev was had the mercy of Lord Krishna not to get bewildered, and then he understood Krishna very well, and then he is now explaining the position of Krishna to everyone assembled there. And also Yashoda Mata, you just mentioned in the last day of Kartika here, and how she got bewildered and then blissfully bewildered, and like what is, I mean, is there a difference among these two bewilderments? I mean, first one is not a bewilderment. He's saving from the, I mean, Krishna is saving the devotees from the bewilderment, but in one sense, he's engaging some devotees in some kind of bewilderment blissfully. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I understand the question correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
But is this question more about what's the difference between us being bewildered, like in this world with the stuff around us and what's going on in our life, versus the bewilderment that we hear about Krishna giving his devotees?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really nice question, actually. I think two things come to mind, and I don't know if devotees on this call have other sort of things, but one is that when we think about our own bewilderment, like I was mentioning, it gives us anxiety, you know, like, okay, you know, I have to wake up on Monday morning, okay, I have to go to work, you know, like, okay, why do I have to work so hard? And then we look at our bosses and, you know, CEOs, and they're like, you know, all relaxed. They come to work in their brand new posh cars, and we're like coming in with our old, like 10-year-old cars and everything else. We get bewildered, like we're working more than they are, but they somehow have more money than us, right? That's one type of bewilderment that we have. Or relationships or anything, right? It gives us anxiety in this world. But when we look at the devotees, right, and sorry, mind you, that anxiety gives us a negative feeling in the heart, right? It's, even if on the surface it might seem quite positive, but we know further down the line it's going to bring us back into some sort of reality check. But when we look at the devotees, on one side you can see Yashodama or say Indradev and all these devotees becoming bewildered and like confused about what's going on, and maybe even lamenting to some extent. But then we see that as the pastime unfolds, they're relishing that bewilderment so much. Like if we think of like the Brahmavi Mohan Leela or Indra's Govardhan Leela, after the pastime has taken place, we see that they're offering their respects, their obeisances, their prayers to Krishna, and it's so magnanimous in terms of their prayers. It's not that they're like, oh, okay, this is how it happened, you know, and then like they kind of have a understanding of reality and then move on. They appreciate what Krishna has just done so much. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has put them in bewilderment, and through that bewilderment, they've done some wrong act. But they're appreciating it so much that, okay, I've done this wrong act, but you know what, Krishna? By your mercy, I know that this has all taken place and you wanted to teach me something. So I think that's kind of the difference that comes to my mind, is like, one is that when we see bewilderment in this world versus that one, it is that difference between the consciousness of that bewilderment. And the second, which is quite standard, is the fact that our bewilderment is to do with the external energy of the Lord. It's taking us away from Krishna, whereas the bewilderment of devotees, if their consciousness is clear, then they see it as something that Krishna is giving them to come closer to Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. I was just thinking about Prabhupada's when he was purchasing a property in US. I think he asked the devotees, and then what was the price, and then it was too high, something like $300,000 that time. And couple of times he just said, no, that it's too much money, just too much anxiety. He keeps on pushing it ahead. So, and then in the end, he just bangs the table and says, no, just purchase it. Anxiety. We have to go through anxiety. It's better to go through spiritual anxiety. So, I was just remembering that point. So, I mean, Prabhupada utilized that anxiety in Krishna's service.
Yeah, that's actually really nice pastime. Take on spiritual anxiety.
Yes.
Take on anxiety for Krishna, and Krishna will take your anxieties away. I don't remember who says that.
Jai, Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Jai, thank you very much. Vidura Das here. Sorry, my connection is not fast enough to switch on the video. I can just go by sound. That was wonderful name, Bhajagovindam Das. Very nice. Congratulations. Bhajagovindam, 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 Mudhamate. Who said that? Do you know who said that? Yes, Adi Shankaracharya, exactly. So you have a constant reminder not to be Mudhamate. Your whole life now is going to be spent focusing on Lord Shiva and that mantra. Very nice, wonderful name. Well, I was thinking about your point about bewilderment. It was very interesting. Very, very nice class. Thank you very much. And Mother Yashoda, when she was chasing Krishna in that form and that Leela, she wasn't exactly bewildered, but she was just exactly playing the role of a mother. This boy is naughty and he needs to be chastised. And she grabbed the stick and ran after him. And Krishna wasn't bewildered either when he was running in fear of his own mother. He was in trepidation. He was seriously in anxiety. Wow, I'm really going to get it now. I've gone over the top, and I'm going to be completely and totally gone for now here. And when she ran and called the neighbors, very nice point you brought up, and asked for more rope and more rope, bring more rope. They were just running out of rope, and every time it was just a couple of inches short, and every time they brought yards and yards and yards of more rope, it was still a couple of inches short. So that was her bewilderment. How on earth? But she wasn't bewildered when she was going to chastise Krishna. She had no idea in any way, shape, or form this is Bhagavan. That thought didn't enter her mind. She was Krishna's mother. It's her duty, her responsibility to make sure he behaves himself properly. And so she was going to really chastise him. In the purport, Prabhupada speaks, the purport that we just read, Prabhupada speaks, the authorities speak and the people in general believe them. But in the case of Vedic truths, they've been taught not to believe. The people just blindly follow the modern scientists as authority. Even if they accept them, they give a different interpretation, even if they accept the Vedic truth. Each and every man wants a direct perception of Vedic knowledge, but foolishly they deny it. This means that the misguided man can believe one authority, the scientist, but will reject the authority of the Vedas. The result is that people have become completely and totally degenerated. So that's what happened with this whole COVID thing. People went for the scientists, the so-called scientists. I'm glad Kirtika is absent from this, because she'll be chastising me like anything from what I'm saying here. But the whole world, as you said, went into lockdown because of this. And the whole world was bewildered because of this virus. And you get one interpretation from one set of scientists, one interpretation from another set of scientists, and India has their idea, America has their idea, and Europe has their idea how to deal with this. And the whole place just completely collapsed because everybody is on the speculative platform, the platform of the mind. I was listening to Prabhupada today. Prabhupada said, if we don't manage to overcome the mind, we're finished. We have to go for the authority being the Veda. And if we go and we follow the Veda, and we follow the parampara, tadvidi pranipratena pariprashnena sevaya upadekjanti teganat jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. Why? Because he has seen the truth, tattvadarshan. That's what we need to follow. We need to follow the tattvadarshan. Everything else is completely and totally secondary. Way, 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 way down the list of priorities. When we follow the Veda, when we follow the actual science, the only science that counts is the science of Bhagavad Gita. Everything else is completely useless. Asara, a complete and total waste of time. So if, in order to, we're not going to get into the comparison between us and the Astakaliya Leela, or the Leela with Yashoda and Krishna. That's a completely different picture. But Mother Yashoda, she was absolutely dedicated and totally fixed on what she was going to do to Krishna. Krishna was totally in fear of her. It's a completely different situation with us. We need to fear the material sphere. We need to be in total and constant consternation about what's going to happen to us if we don't take shelter of the holy name. Satatam kirtayanto mam, yatantascha dridha vrata, namasyanchas tamam bhakya, nitya yukta upashate. Krishna says twice, always, in the same verse. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, perpetually worshipping me with devotion, these great souls bound down before me. So Krishna is saying, with determination, dridha vrata. So we have to take this vow of determination to fix our lives on devotion to Prabhupada, fix our lives on devotion to Krishna. And it takes a big, serious vow. It's not a joke. Yes, we may be initiated. We may have gone through the process. We may be chanting our rounds, going to the daily programs, so on and so forth, endeavoring to be devotees. But Maya is not a joke. Maya is no joke. Maya doesn't send you a text message and say, okay, Vidura, tomorrow I'm going to put you in illusion and I'm going to bewilder you. And you better be prepared for it. It doesn't work like that. You don't get an email from Maya. Slowly but surely it creeps up on you. And before you know where you are, you're completely and totally in Maya. And you're the last person to understand this. You're the first person to experience it and the last person to recognize it. Everybody else can say, oh, Vidura's in Maya. Just look what he's doing. Look at his behavior. And I'm going around thinking, oh, yes, Yatamat tatapat. I'm fine. Everything is glorious. It doesn't work like that. Maya is not a joke. I just finished reading the whole canto of Jad Bharat. Look at Jad Bharat. Look at his elevated status. I mean, who am I compared to Jad Bharat? And the way he became completely entrapped and falling in love with the deer. And then his whole life was transformed. All his tapasya, everything was gone. All his Vedic knowledge, boom, disappeared in a flash. So Maya is not a joke. That's why we have to take shelter of the total and complete absolute truth. And it's so nice. It's so unfortunate that I can't join these classes so often because it's dinner time in England, and I'm the main cook in our house, and not because I'm a good cook, because just that everybody else is so busy. My wife is preparing to go to work. She's a nurse in a very busy hospital near here, and so I take care of the evening meal. It's just and then with the change in the clock last week, it makes it even more difficult to join in. But I'd love to be able to join in. These classes are so important. It's so wonderful to see that they're going on, and they're going on without stopping. And it's so nice to get such a variety of so many different points of view on the Bhagavatam. It's so great to hear. And thank you very much for your class. And thank you very much to all the devotees who are keeping it up and keeping it going. Sorry, I'll shut up now. I better keep quiet, because once I start, you can't shut me up, and that's the problem. Jai, thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you for joining, and we hope you can get time to join all the time.
Jai, thank you very much, Prabhu. All glorious.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Are there any other questions or comments? We have exceeded the time. Prabhuji, you're okay? You're not running out of time?
I'm good, Prabhu. I'm good.
Okay.
I'm not the main cook, though.
Okay, I think if there are no other questions or comments, we can end this session here. I request all the devotees to unmute and chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra once in glorification of His grace. Bhaja Govindam Prabhu.
Jai.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Mancha Kalupyasya Patitanam
Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo
Namo.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
His grace Bhaja Govindam Prabhu ki jai.
Prabhupada ki jai. ISKCON Eldoret ki jai.
Jai. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.